"You ever seen a dead airplane come back to life?" Captain Ethan Brooks asked, loud enough for everyone on the flight line to hear. The laughter came instantly. It rolled across the concrete apron beneath the hot afternoon sun, bouncing off maintenance carts, toolboxes, and the silent gray shape of the A-10 Thunderbolt II parked at the far end of the ramp. The aircraft sat motionless in the shimmering heat haze, its twin engines cold despite 6 straight hours of diagnostics. Around it stood a dozen technicians in crisp uniforms, tablets in hand, their faces tight with frustration. Every system check had come back green. Every sensor insisted the aircraft was healthy. Yet the warthog refused to wake up. 47 minutes remained before the Air Combat Heritage demonstration was scheduled to begin. Distinguished guests were already gathering near the viewing area. Families filled the bleachers. Reporters adjusted cameras beneath temporary shade structures. But on the flight line itself, confidence was beginning to crack. Captain Brooks folded his arms and stared at the elderly man standing near the safety barrier. Walter Hayes looked completely out of place. His faded brown jacket seemed older than some of the airmen working around him. The brim of his weathered ball cap cast a shadow across his lined face. He stood quietly with both hands resting atop a worn leather bag that looked like it had survived decades of hard use. To most people, he appeared to be nothing more than an aging visitor who had wandered too close to the maintenance area. Brooks smirked and pointed toward the stubborn aircraft. "Go ahead," he called. "You said you used to work on A-10s. Be my guest. Maybe you know something the computers missed." More laughter followed. A few technicians exchanged amused looks. One shook his head and muttered something about museum mechanics. Another glanced toward Walter's old leather bag and chuckled. Walter never reacted. His pale blue eyes remained fixed on the aircraft. The silence seemed to irritate Brooks more than any argument could have. Most people pushed back when challenged. Most people defended themselves. Walter simply watched the aircraft. The captain took a few steps closer. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Cat got your tongue?" The old veteran tilted his head slightly. The hot wind carried the smell of jet fuel across the ramp. Somewhere beyond the hangars, a transport aircraft climbed into the cloudless sky. Walter's gaze moved slowly along the A-10's fuselage. He studied the wings, the engine nacelles, the access panels, every detail. Then he spoke. His voice was low and calm, barely louder than the breeze. "She's trying to tell you something." The flight line erupted with laughter. One technician nearly dropped his tablet. Another slapped a coworker on the shoulder. Even Brooks laughed openly now. "The airplane is talking?" he asked. "That's what we're doing now." Walter didn't answer. His eyes never left the aircraft. For a brief moment, the laughter faded into the background. The old veteran seemed to be listening to something nobody else could hear. And somehow, standing beneath the scorching sun with 47 minutes left before disaster, that silence felt heavier than all the noise around him. The laughter lingered for several seconds before slowly fading beneath the growing pressure hanging over the flight line. Nobody was smiling when they looked back at the aircraft. The A-10 remained exactly as it had all morning. Silent, motionless, uncooperative. Captain Ethan Brooks checked his watch and felt his jaw tighten. 44 minutes. The demonstration schedule was already beginning to collapse. Across the ramp, crews were repositioning support vehicles while event coordinators spoke urgently into radios. Every minute that passed increased the chances of public embarrassment. Brooks turned toward the maintenance team. "Run it again." Nobody argued. A senior technician immediately stepped toward a diagnostic cart and connected another cable to the aircraft. Screens illuminated with charts, numbers, and system reports. Fans inside the equipment hummed steadily. The technicians moved with practiced confidence, each trusting the technology in front of them more than their own instincts. Several minutes passed. The result was exactly the same. Green indicators filled the display. Electrical systems checked out. Fuel pressure looked normal. Engine controls reported no faults. Sensors across the aircraft insisted everything was operating correctly. Yet the aircraft refused to start. One technician removed his headset and rubbed his forehead. "There is nothing wrong with it." Another shook his head. "There has to be. The system says there is not." Frustration spread through the group. Nobody liked problems they could not explain. Modern aircraft were supposed to be predictable. Every malfunction left a trail. Every issue generated data. Every failure had a code. But this aircraft seemed determined to ignore every rule they trusted. The afternoon sun reflected off the gray fuselage, creating a steel glare that shimmered above the hot concrete. Waves of heat distorted the air around the engines. Walter Hayes continued watching from the edge of the ramp. He had not moved. He had not spoken. He simply observed. To everyone else, the aircraft looked lifeless. To Walter, it appeared almost familiar. Nearby, a young airman named Jake Turner stood quietly holding a tablet against his chest. Unlike the others, he found himself glancing toward Walter more often than the aircraft. Something about the old man felt unusual, not because of what he had said, because of what he had not said. Most visitors would have left after being laughed at. Most people would have defended themselves. Walter seemed completely unaffected, as if none of it mattered. Captain Brooks paced beside the aircraft. "Try auxiliary power again." The crew complied. Another attempt followed. Another failure. The only sound was a brief mechanical whine before silence returned. Brooks exhaled sharply. Unbelievable. One of the technicians glanced toward Walter and smirked. Maybe the airplane is still trying to tell us something. A few chuckles followed. Walter remained silent. His eyes moved slowly along the aircraft's left side, from the nose section to the wing root, from the wing root to the engine nacelle. His gaze paused for only a second, then continued. Jake noticed. The pause had been brief, almost invisible, yet it had happened. The old veteran had seen something. Jake was suddenly sure of it. He looked back toward the aircraft. Nothing appeared unusual. No warning lights. No visible damage. No obvious defects. Still, the feeling remained. While everyone else stared at screens searching for answers, Walter Hayes was studying the machine itself. And for the first time all afternoon, Jake began to wonder whether the computers might not be the smartest things on the flight line. 39 minutes remained. The number sat on every clock across the operations area like a warning nobody wanted to acknowledge. The pressure was no longer hidden behind confident smiles and technical jargon. It was visible now. It lived in hurried footsteps, clipped radio transmissions, and the tight expressions of men and women who were running out of explanations. Captain Ethan Brooks stood beside the aircraft with his hands on his hips, staring at the maintenance display as if willing it to reveal an answer. The screen remained unchanged. Green, green, green. Every system insisted the aircraft was ready. Every attempt proved otherwise. A warm gust swept across the ramp, carrying the scent of hot concrete and jet fuel. Walter Hayes finally shifted his weight and took a slow step forward. Nobody stopped him. Most of the crew barely noticed. Their attention remained fixed on diagnostics and procedures. Walter's eyes remained on the aircraft. Not the screens. Not the technicians. The aircraft. There was something almost familiar in the way he studied it. Like a man reading the face of an old friend after years apart. Jake Turner watched from a distance. The feeling in his stomach had not gone away. If anything, it had grown stronger. The old veteran did not seem impressed by the technology surrounding him. He did not appear intimidated by the officers or the equipment. He simply looked patient, as though he had seen this situation before. One of the technicians noticed Walter approaching and smirked. "Careful," he said. "Maybe she will start talking again." A few chuckles followed. Walter ignored them completely. He stopped several yards from the aircraft and tilted his head. The sunlight reflected off the gray metal skin. The aircraft appeared motionless, yet Walter's eyes moved with deliberate precision. Along the fuselage, across the engine housing, down the wing root, then back again. Captain Brooks noticed him. "Looking for magic?" he asked. Walter glanced toward him. No, the answer was calm. Simple. Brooks folded his arms. "Then what are you looking for?" Walter turned back toward the aircraft. "A reason." The response earned another round of laughter. Brooks shook his head. "We have 3 diagnostic teams looking for reasons." Walter nodded once. "That might be the problem." The words landed softly, but Jake felt them immediately. Several technicians exchanged irritated looks. One opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. Nobody seemed quite sure why. Walter did not sound arrogant. He did not sound critical. He sounded certain. The difference unsettled them. Nearby, an event coordinator hurried past while speaking into a radio. Across the base, a transport truck rolled by. Time continued moving forward. The demonstration clock continued counting down. Yet Walter seemed untouched by the urgency. His gaze settled briefly on the aircraft's left side. A tiny section beneath the wing. Nothing obvious. Nothing dramatic. Just a small area most people ignored. Jake followed his line of sight. He saw nothing unusual. Still, Walter kept looking. The old veteran's expression never changed. But for the first time all afternoon, Jake Turner had the unmistakable feeling that one person on the flight line was no longer searching for the problem. He was getting closer to finding it. 34 minutes remained before the demonstration. The number seemed to echo through every corner of the flight line. Radios crackled. Vehicles moved faster. Supervisors checked schedules with increasing urgency. Yet the aircraft remained silent beneath the afternoon sun. Captain Ethan Brooks had finally lost what little patience he had left. He watched Walter Hayes standing near the wing and shook his head. "You know what amazes me," he said loudly enough for the nearby crew to hear. "Every time something breaks, somebody shows up claiming experience from 30 years ago." Several technicians laughed. One nodded in agreement. Brooks pointed toward the aircraft. "This is not Desert Storm. This is not some old maintenance hangar with clipboards and grease pencils. We have diagnostics. We have engineering support. We have systems that can monitor thousands of variables every second." Walter listened without reacting. Brooks took another step closer. "You keep staring at that airplane like it is about to reveal some secret." More laughter followed. The captain spread his hands. "Maybe next you can tell us what the clouds think about the fuel system." The crew enjoyed that one. Even a few stressed technicians managed tired smiles. Walter remained still. His eyes never left the aircraft. The silence made Brooks uncomfortable. He wanted resistance. He wanted an argument. Instead, he received nothing. Jake Turner noticed it immediately. The old veteran never tried to defend himself, never tried to prove anything. He simply observed, as though the opinions around him carried no weight at all. Brooks looked toward the weathered leather bag resting beside Walter's boots. "What is in there anyway?" he asked. "Ancient secrets?" One technician laughed and said, "Probably tools older than the airplane." Walter glanced briefly at the bag. The corners of his eyes softened almost imperceptibly. "Some of them are." The response triggered another round of laughter. Brooks shook his head. "Unbelievable." Then he turned toward the maintenance crew. "Run another inspection on the engine controls." The technicians immediately returned to work. Tablets appeared. Checklists resumed. Procedures repeated. Yet Jake noticed something strange. Nobody seemed confident anymore. They were not searching because they believed the answer was there. They were searching because they had nothing else left to try. A warm breeze swept across the concrete. Walter slowly walked a few feet closer to the aircraft. His attention settled once more beneath the left wing. The same spot. The same section of metal. Jake followed his gaze again. Still nothing stood out. No damaged panel. No warning label. No visible defect. Just smooth, gray metal reflecting sunlight. Walter studied it for several seconds. Then he quietly spoke. "How many times did you replace that actuator?" The question caught everyone off guard. A technician looked up from his tablet. "What?" Walter nodded toward the aircraft. "The actuator behind that panel." The technician frowned. "Twice." Walter asked another question. "And after the second replacement, did the problem change?" The technician blinked. No, for the first time all afternoon, nobody laughed. A subtle shift moved through the group. Walter was not guessing. He was asking specific questions. Questions connected to repairs that had actually happened. Jake saw the expression on the technician's face. Confusion, surprise, uncertainty, and standing beneath the relentless heat, surrounded by computers worth millions of dollars, a single uncomfortable thought began spreading across the flight line. The old veteran might know more about the aircraft than anyone standing there. Walter Hayes opened his weathered leather bag slowly, deliberately, the soft creak of the flap sounding unusually loud against the quiet hum of the flight line. Inside lay tools that bore the marks of decades, scratched wrenches, polished sockets, and a small torque gauge that looked older than some of the technicians handling modern diagnostic equipment. He lifted a slender, aged wrench and held it just above the panel he had been studying. The metal caught the sun, glinting briefly as if signaling that something significant was about to happen. Jake Turner stepped closer, careful not to distract the old veteran, and noticed the faint, precise movements Walter made with his hands. There was no hesitation, no fumbling. Each gesture carried a confidence that seemed to defy time itself. Captain Ethan Brooks watched with increasing impatience, the laughter and mockery having faded into tension as he realized the seriousness in Walter's demeanor. "What are you doing?" Brooks asked, trying to mask the growing concern in his voice. Walter did not answer immediately. His eyes remained focused on the access panel, scanning the alignment of bolts and the smoothness of the metal edges. He tapped lightly with the wrench, listening to the subtle vibrations, feeling for resonance and resistance that no instrument could detect. The heat radiated from the concrete beneath his boots, and the air shimmered over the fuselage. Yet Walter moved as if the world had narrowed to this single panel. A small bead of sweat slid down his temple, unnoticed, as his mind replayed memories embedded deep from years of service. The flashback was subtle, triggered by the worn metal in his hand. Desert sand underfoot, the roar of an engine long silent, coaxed back to life under his touch. Fellow airmen counting on him for more than just mechanical skill, trusting him to restore something that meant the difference between readiness and failure. Walter's fingers found a tiny misalignment in the actuator that had been replaced twice already. To anyone else, the difference would have been imperceptible. To him, it was glaring. He adjusted it with a gentle torque, calibrated instinctively. Jake's eyes widened as he realized that Walter had located the root of the persistent problem in moments where complex diagnostics had failed for hours. Captain Brooks stepped forward, frowning, still not believing what he was seeing. "That cannot be it," he said, voice tinged with disbelief. "We have systems that measure everything down to microvariations." Walter looked up briefly, his calm blue eyes meeting Brooks' gaze. "Sometimes," he said softly, "systems tell you what they think, not what is actually happening." The flight line fell silent. Technicians paused mid-step. Tablets hovered in the air. Even the hum of nearby generators seemed to quiet as the realization spread that the old veteran had just demonstrated insight that technology alone could not provide. Jake Turner slowly nodded, impressed and a little unsettled, recognizing that Walter Hayes was performing at a level that no one had anticipated. The panel clicked smoothly as the actuator aligned perfectly under Walter's touch. The heat of the afternoon, the tension, and the countdown to the demonstration all seemed to compress into this one silent moment. For a brief second, nothing moved. The old veteran's work spoke louder than words. Then, as if acknowledging his accomplishment, Walter stepped back, his hands folding naturally over the worn leather bag, eyes scanning the aircraft once more to confirm that everything was ready. Captain Brooks remained still, processing what had just occurred, his earlier smugness replaced by a mixture of awe and unease. Jake felt a surge of respect ripple through the remaining crew, the kind of respect that came not from orders or rank, but from witnessing a lifetime of skill, experience, and quiet confidence distilled into one flawless action. The A-10 was ready, not because of technology alone, but because Walter Hayes had recognized, understood, and corrected the problem with the precision of a man who had dedicated decades to mastery of his craft. Walter Hayes took a measured step back from the aircraft, the leather of his bag softly brushing the concrete beneath him. He allowed himself a brief pause, eyes scanning every curve and panel of the A-10 one final time, ensuring that no detail had been overlooked. The engines remained silent for the moment, their potential held in restrained anticipation. Around him, the flight line seemed to hold its breath. Captain Ethan Brooks straightened, an unusual tension settling into his shoulders as he observed Walter with a mix of disbelief and begrudging respect. Jake Turner stepped closer, keeping his distance but eager to witness what would come next. The sun reflected off the fuselage, casting fleeting highlights that danced over the panels and nacelles. Each shimmer accentuated the veteran's deliberate movements and unwavering focus. Walter reached for the starter switch, his fingers tracing the contours with care honed from decades of intimate familiarity with the aircraft. The old tools lay neatly beside him, perfectly arranged, every wrench and gauge in its place, as if waiting for the exact moment of activation. He exhaled slowly, a quiet rhythm that seemed to draw the attention of everyone around him without a word. Then, almost imperceptibly, the engines responded. A low, resonant hum began deep within the turbine housing, vibrating through the frame of the aircraft and into the concrete below. The vibration grew steadily, each pulse building a tangible sense of motion. Technicians instinctively stepped back, exchanging glances that carried unspoken recognition of skill that surpassed their own understanding. Captain Brooks exhaled sharply, his earlier smirk replaced by a rigid line of concentration. Walter continued to adjust, hands precise and movements fluid, coaxing the engines to life with a patience and authority that seemed almost ceremonial. The hum expanded, turning into a steady roar that resonated across the flight line. Jake Turner felt it in his chest, a physical reminder of the power Walter controlled with ease. Nearby, other airmen instinctively straightened, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. The engines now spun smoothly, the turbines glowing faintly beneath the heat haze. Walter's eyes remained steady, calm, and focused, observing the aircraft's response, ensuring that nothing would be overlooked before the demonstration. Captain Brooks finally stepped back, a mixture of awe and disbelief evident in his stance. He had witnessed what none of his modern training could produce in hours of testing and diagnostics. Jake noticed the subtle nod from Walter, as if confirming that the aircraft was now in perfect condition, ready for the demonstration. The roar of the turbines carried across the tarmac, reaching distant spectators and staff, signaling not just readiness but mastery earned from decades of experience. The subtle authority of Walter's presence, the quiet command of his movements, and the precise execution had transformed the flight line into a tableau of competence and respect.